Oh, what a perfect follow-up to the discussion we were just having. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was really great. Thanks, Chris and team.
Can't
Welcome,
see any
Michaela.
of you.
Yeah, can't see any of you. Nice and bright up
Hopefully
here.
you can see us.
But I think this is a great continuation of the session we just had. We learned a little bit about what the Metaverse is and what's coming. I think in this session we'll focus a little bit more on what are we doing, particularly what is PwC doing, and what are you learning so far that others may be able to benefit from. So maybe to start off, want to introduce yourself, Michaela?
Yeah. So good morning, everybody. I'm Michaela Graham. I lead innovation for a section of our U.S. firm, our acceleration centers, and I'm also part of our Metaverse strategy team at PwC. So for those of you who think we only do tax and audit, we are also heavy into the Metaverse technology space as well.
Awesome. And briefly, I'm Alex Hallam, the co-founder and president of Virbela. We create virtual worlds and metaverse platforms for work, events, and education, and we've been doing it since about 2010. So we weren't calling it Metaverse back then, but certainly interesting to see the ride and where it's going. We heard some definitions of the Metaverse. What does the Metaverse mean to you, Michaela, or PwC?
Yeah, I mean, I love what the speaker said before. I think for us and how we're viewing it is that, you know, the metaverse is more of a concept, and it's the coming together of technologies that are either currently existing or in development, you know, that are going to take us to, you know, this destination where, you know, people will interact in 3D virtual worlds, and you will have that interoperability that our previous speakers had talked about. But right now, what we're really focused on is the different technologies that will help us get to where we're going. And so I think for us, the metaverse is, it's everything. It's all these new technologies.
Give us a sense of what you're doing today, right? You're talking a little bit about the vision and where the metaverse will go, you know, maybe in the future, but what can we do today? What are you doing today specifically?
So we're doing a little bit of everything, but one of the things that we did last year, so coming out of the pandemic, so we have about 30,000 people that sit outside of the US firm all over the globe in about 8 different countries. And we have a large team that sits in Shanghai as well. And so obviously we're all very familiar with the pandemic and you know what had happened, but Shanghai was hit particularly hard, several lockdowns. And so we were looking for a way to engage our teams a little bit differently. We knew that people were tired of the traditional interaction platforms like Google Meet or Zoom or what have you. And so we looked around and tried to find a different way to engage our teams. And so we implemented a virtual world last year and started with an innovation conference and brought our teams together across all of these spaces and have continued to use the platform for engagement. And our Shanghai team in particular, at the end of last year, in their, I think, second or third lockdown, held an event. 1,200 people came together on this platform and celebrated their successes at the end of the year. And they had scavenger hunts. They celebrated their culture, so not only the PwC culture, but their rich Asian culture as well. And that was really fascinating. I learned a lot about their culture sitting in on that session. They were able to connect with one another. And so that's, I think, how we have seen these types of platforms be used from an employee engagement standpoint. You know, of course, we were talking about, the previous speakers were talking about VR, XR, some training, things like that. But from just a pure employee engagement standpoint, we've seen a huge interest in these spaces and how people can get in there and represent themselves and interact with their teams in a way that they couldn't before.
Awesome. And there are a lot of different values to all the different platforms that we use, like Google Meet and Zoom and those sorts of things. Where do you see the value, you know, of the avatar and the three-dimensional space that these metaverse platforms provide?
So the first thing that I want to kind of dispel the myth of, I know when we started, at least when I started kind of getting into this space, the number of people who asked me if like our avatars were going to take over the world or they were going to like take over the company or whatever it was like, no, this is not like a dystopic novel. You know, the benefit for us is really that as an extension of myself, my digital self in these spaces, it's more immersive. you're able to get in there. I can look around. I can talk to people. I can see people. I can recognize you. I can recognize my teammates. I can go and have a conversation with them. And it's different, especially when you start talking about hundreds of people coming together in a virtual way. I can walk around my space that we've built and interact with different people and know they're there versus, in these other types of platforms where maybe I wouldn't necessarily know that somebody was attending the same call or something as me. Like I can actually see their avatar that looks like them, and interact with them in a very real way, or walk up to a conversation that they may be having, excuse me, with somebody else.
Yeah, very cool. Interestingly, both of our backgrounds are as organizational psychologists.
Yeah.
So I started Virbela when I was pursuing my PhD in organizational psychology and really saw our need to bring people together from different parts of the world and give them a safe place to practice and do things and really lean into different approaches and learn about different cultures, given that they're going to go work for global companies like yours and interact. And what I've also noticed is the different personas that feel comfortable in these environments. So the maybe more extroverted person who feels more comfortable in a face-to-face setting, in some ways might actually be a little disadvantaged in the virtual world, but maybe someone more introverted who doesn't really lean into difficult conversations or engage or share their ideas is more likely to share their ideas in here. So the last panel talked about inclusion and equity. Mm-hmm. Are you seeing that show up at all in your deployment so far?
Yeah, absolutely. We were kind of joking before this that my first phone call was at 5 o'clock this morning, and I was amazing at 5 a.m. And so it was awesome to be able to be an avatar because this takes time. But from other areas that we've talked about in terms of DE&I is that you can show up how you most see yourself, right? There are some things that prevent us physically when we show up from being the most authentic version of how we see ourselves, right? But in the metaverse and in some of these platforms, like if I think I'm, a panda, as this previous speaker said, I can show up as a panda, right? I can change the physical attributes of myself to best match how I feel, and I think that's so important, especially in today's culture.
For sure. There's also, we think a lot about the access to leadership, right? You can have collisions with your manager or the boss or the organization without necessarily scheduling a meeting with that person. So it brings back some of those collisions that happen in the physical environment that don't happen over scheduled, meetings. And there's that kind of benefit and fun of bumping into your colleagues.
Yeah. I really like the point that the speakers made previously about it being about people. So when I got into this space, it was really about how do we help our people do something differently? And I think that's kind of something we're all looking at, right? Like, how do we help our people? This isn't about a specific technology or, the latest fad or whatever. It's really about how we help our people. And so whether that's through access to leadership, whether that's training, whether that's making them feel more engaged within our PwC culture or the cultures of your workplaces, it's really about how do we help them engage in a different way. And that's, I think when you always go back to people and you always go back to wanting to do the best for people, you're going to get the outcome. And that's the value that we're trying to drive, not to adopt the latest technology or do something faddish.
Some of the benefits of how do we provide the best opportunity to work from anywhere, which in the pandemic, people have certainly shown that they value the ability to work from anywhere, but yet the benefits of being together in the office in an immersive sense. So it sounds like you're using it for events, for employee engagement. Are people starting to dabble in terms of using it kind of as their office?
Yeah. So if you all didn't read my bio, I live in South Dakota. And so there is not a PwC office in South Dakota. I work completely remote unless I'm working or unless I'm traveling. And so my team, we all have offices in our campus. And we are able to walk from my office. I can see if my boss is there or my teammate is there and walk over and have a conversation. We can quickly grab people and go into a conference room. We can walk around if there's an event happening on the campus and engage with people who may be on the campus for a separate event. So I think that the persistentness of being in this space is coming. And that's not to say that we live in these spaces, right? Like it's to say that it's another way of engaging,
Yeah.
with our colleagues.
Right. And I guess I do live in these spaces. My team's about 125 folks. We used to have a physical office in San Diego. We no longer do. We grew from about, 15 to about the 125 when the pandemic hit. And we recruit from all over. So we like to say we drink our own champagne. So we go to work every day in that office, and the benefit of not having to be camera ready or on camera all the time, but still that feeling of connection in being in the office with your team is really powerful. And what we find is when we actually do get together physically, it's like we've met before, even though we've only looked at each other's avatars. Pretty powerful. The psychology is powerful. Sometimes it kind of makes me sad, like, oh, it's really easy to trick our brains.
It's amazing how the mind works, right?
Yeah,
it's great.
yeah. So,
flood of questions from the audience. So
Okay.
I wonder
Okay.
if that's
we
okay,
can't
we
see
can
you,
we can
so
jump
we
onto.
can't see your hands.
yeah,
Jump
we'd
onto
love
this.
to hear. We'd love to hear some questions. And apologies, we can't.
Okay. Most of these are anonymous. Hopefully that doesn't mean anything. Part of the so this is one which is part of the Zoom fatigue. Part of the problem of Zoom fatigue is having to be stationary and facing the camera. Does the metaverse participation help solve this problem? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you're on a call or whatever, like you want to be looking at the camera, and I think part of it too is that you can see yourself, right? And so you're constantly distracted by your own image and like what face you're making or what your hair is doing or whatever it is. But you have to be kind of facing the camera. With my avatar, I can sit, I can turn, I can face the wall if I wanted to. Like I could sit on the floor, doesn't matter. I can do some yoga, But my avatar is still there, and as long as you can hear me, you're able to, to really get the sense of what I'm doing, and you're not limited to just the actual physical movements of what I'm doing.
Yeah. I think the cognitive load of being on camera is lessened too by not being on camera. So you have some of that separation. I know I have a roller in my office that I use quite regularly while
He's
I'm
doing
in
yoga.
meetings and whatnot. So, yeah.
That's super interesting. Thank you. And sorry, these questions are moving around. Yeah. So a question for Michaela. So I think you've spoken quite a lot about using the metaverse internally for training and for communicating. To what extent are your kind of clients interested in it, getting involved in it, experimenting with it, and so on?
Yeah, I mean, it's everywhere. I mean, it's like I think people think that it's like a thing that's coming, right? But it's a thing it's here. It's here in its various forms and fashions. So whether you are engaged in, some sort of virtual reality or augmented reality training, for that immersive sense. If you're, implementing a virtual world like Verbella, if you're using digital twins and the Internet of Things, like that technology is already there. And because at least for PwC, we're such a broad company across a broad range of industries, like you could, throw a rock and hit a case study that we're covering. So we can talk about that later. So.
Wonderful. And so this is all kind of great for Gen Z, but how do you get kind of senior execs, and I guess the meaning of senior there is kind of twofold, but immersed in and kind of more engaged in the in what can be quite an alien experience?
So I'll just speak from my personal experience, and yes, I mean I sort of agree with that statement, right? Like the generations coming up, they've grown up in this era. Right? Like it's just like their hands. Like my kids use Roblox, and it's second nature to them. But what I will say is that I think the pandemic really expedited the acceptance of engaging in a different way, right? Like people working outside of the office, people wanting to work from home or be at home with their families, but also still be immersed in the culture and stuff. And so we do have, although I think the average age of our employees, is about 25 at PwC. Obviously, we do have older generations that have interacted with these types of technologies, and I would say by and large, it's been overwhelmingly positive. And the thing that I would say to people, and Alex and I were talking about this earlier, that for me and being in the metaverse technology space, that it's really about understanding that somebody else's reality may be different from my own, but it doesn't make it any less valid, right? Like I think we all hear, like, at first when I got into this space, I was like, I don't know, somebody paid like $12,000 for a robe on, I don't know, Decentraland. I was like, what is that? But it was like, to be able to say, well, that's maybe not something that I would do, but it doesn't make it any less valid for that person's reality or that person's experience, right? And so I think being able to kind of suspend what maybe is normal for me or what I do on a daily basis and allow for other people's realities has been so helpful.
Yeah. Maybe just to add on that, our sister company is called eXp Realty, and I'd say they're the only multi-billion-dollar company that's grown up on a platform where they go to the office. They're all in. They go to the office and serve their customer, the realtor, on the platform. And they're the fastest growing real estate company in the world. They've gone from 1,000 agents to over 85,000 agents in 6 years. And their competitors can't afford the business model that they offer their agents because of how much they save by operating in the metaverse versus operating in physical brick and mortars. And I mention this because the average age of the realtor for them is over 50 years old, right? So this is the first company at scale that's done this, I think, really successful from early stage startup to now multi-billion-dollar, publicly traded NASDAQ company, and age hasn't been a factor.
And Alex, on that tantalizing example, we're going to have to wrap up here. Yeah. Sorry, that's absolutely fascinating, and I wish we could talk about this a lot longer. And I'm sure our audience will track you both down during the breaks and ask you many questions. But could we give a big round of applause for Alex and Michaela? That was fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.